Welcome to Cafe Tales. Tonight, scandal spills from the salons of Mayfair. A vanished snuff box, a portfolio tied with gross-grain ribbon, and photographs that whisper ruin. The Duke swears his honor. The Duchess sharpens her wit. And somewhere among ribbons and cherubs, Poirot seeks the truth. This is the Duchess, the snuff box, and the cherub. An original story written by us in homage to Agatha Christie, inspired by the notorious Duke of Argyll divorce scandal, when society was shaken by whispered affairs and the infamous headless man photographs. Our telling, of course, is entirely our own invention. Before we begin, join in the fun. As you listen, drop your guess for the killer in the comments. Add the timestamp, the suspect, and the clue that convinced you. I'll be looking through them, and it's always a delight to see how your little gray cells are working. Creating these stories, writing, narration, and sound takes many hours each week. And it's your support that allows us to continue. You can join our membership for ad-free listening and exclusive extras, or leave a small tip via Buy Me a Coffee. Links in the description. And one simple thing makes a huge difference. Nearly 7 in 10 regular listeners aren't subscribed. If that's you, one quick tap on subscribe is the lightest lift with the biggest impact on the future of Nocturnal Tales. Now, the curtains part. The Duchess enters, and the play of scandal begins. Chapter 1, in which a hatpin behaves immorally. It is a matter of common experience that the British public will read anything so long as it is about the private life of someone they do not know. That particular morning, London breakfasted not on bacon, but on scandal. Duchess and Doc, who is the headless man? Announced one newspaper, with a woodcut that somehow contrived to have a chin. Another, more literary, declared, a peer, a photograph, and a very bad idea. Had just completed my kippers and was informing Poirot that this sort of thing was a menace to national morale when our landlady glided in with a calling card balanced upon a saucer, which is how one introduces a duke or a particularly dangerous cake. The card read, His Grace, the Duke of Strathavon. Tear murmured Poirot, I said. When the aristocracy comes to the breakfast table, mon ami, it desires either coffee or a miracle. I straightened my tie and attempted a man-of-the-world air. The door opened to admit a tall gentleman of about 55, heavy at the shoulder and upholstered at the waist, with hair graying at the temples and a mouth trained for monosyllables. His clothes were of the kind that look expensive because they have never been asked to do anything. In his lapel, entirely at odds with his station and his face, was a lady's hat pin, a slim black thing with a seed pearl head, thrust through as if it had won a duel with his buttonhole. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, said the Duke, as one might acknowledge 2 chairs that had been placed for him. I apologize for the intrusion. My circumstances are... He paused, as if reluctant to use a word requiring 3 syllables. Difficult. Poirot's eyes warmed with that politeness he reserves for the bewildered. Pray be seated, Your Grace. Talk to us as you would to the priest, the lawyer, or the torturer, in confidence and preferably in detail. The Duke sat with the care of a man who fears furniture. My wife, Margaret, Duchess of Strathavon, has initiated divorce proceedings against me. You have seen the papers, his jaw hardened. There are photographs. Ah, said Poirot, steepling his fingers. The headless gentleman, who is everywhere and therefore nowhere. The body is alleged to be mine, the Duke said grimly. It is not. I am, whatever else I may be, not a fool. I do not pose in my shirt sleeves for persons with portable cameras. The ring, however, is mine. My signet has been Strathavon property since the less hygienic days of the Stuarts. In several images, abominably composed, you can see a hand wearing it. I coughed to appear blasé. Trick of the light? No trick, said the Duke. My wife recognizes it. The newspapers are sharpening their adjectives. I am to be ruined, not by what I have done, but by what I apparently am. Poirot inclined his head. And why do you come to us, who deal in little gray cells and not in matrimonial thunderbolts? Because, the Duke said, leaning forward, a week ago, a family heirloom vanished from Strathavon House, my London residence, an 18th century cameo snuffbox, onyx and sardonyx, with our crest in relief. 2 days after its disappearance, my wife found, I repeat, found, a portfolio of indecent photographs. She would have the world believe the one explains the other. I believe someone is conducting a campaign. Whether against me or for her, I cannot say. But the timing stinks. He spoke the last word with the melancholy relish of a man rarely permitted slang. Parfait, said Poirot gently. A theft, a portfolio, a reputation. The triangles are always interesting, Hastings. The Duke regarded Poirot with wintry patience. I am not here to save my marriage, monsieur. It cannot be saved. I am here to prevent a villain from dictating the terms of its death. He hesitated, then added with a strange, stiff honesty. I am not blameless in life. Few men are, but one likes one's lies to be one's own. Poirot's mustaches gave a small, sympathetic tremor. And what would you have us do, Your Grace? Attend a private viewing at my wife's chambers tomorrow at 11 o'clock, said the Duke. Her solicitor, Mr. Basil Trenchard, insufferably smooth fellow, has arranged to show the prints to certain persons who enjoy tutting. I would have you examine them before they are paraded for the public good. Poirot's eyes slid not to the Duke's face, but to the hat-pin in his lapel. You wear a small lance of the feminine, Your Grace. The Duke glanced down, annoyed. The confounded thing. My valet idiot used it to secure a carnation at a charity ball last night. It went through the fabric. The buttonhole is torn. I stuck the pin back to disguise the damage. Is the matter criminal? I asked. Illogical, said Poirot, twinkling. Even an improvised hat-pin tells a story. Today you are a man making do. It is a useful mood in which to seek justice. I said that if our little parlor was to become a millinery detective agency, I would resign my post and take to golf, but Poirot only waved me down and asked for particulars. We had them, the I. Snuffbox's usual place was a velvet recess in a glass-fronted cabinet in the library at Strathavon House, Bond Street, end of Mayfair, a locality where even the chimneys ask for references. The last person to see the box, apart from the Duke, was the butler, Mr. Crichton, who dusted everything that could not protest. The Duchess had been spending more time at the Lady Septon, a discreet hotel in Mayfair with napery-like altar cloths and waiters who knew one's sins by their sources. Between the house and the hotel fluttered Mr. Trenchard, the solicitor, whom the Duke described, with cold accuracy as the kind of man who polishes his pens. And the servants? Poirot asked. A gardener who believes roses are cavalry, said the Duke. A footman whose chief talent is to be standing in the wrong place at the right time. A housemaid who thinks my ancestors are nice gentlemen in frames. He grimaced. Also, a temporary man in the library for cataloging. My wife's doing a clerk from Trenchard's office. Name of Lionel Vane, anxious fellow with the moral stamina of blancmange. I say, a clerk in the library? Isn't that like putting a fox on the inventory of hens? A fox would have better handwriting, said the Duke. Vane came with testimonials and the expression of a cult that has just heard about fences. Poirot made a small note. We shall naturally look at the library. Look at whatever you please, said the Duke, rising. Only for God's sake be discreet. If the papers discover I have consulted a detective, they will add a mustache to their headlines. Poirot bowed. Discretion is the middle name of Hercule Poirot. Also the first and last, when necessary. When our visitor had gone, with all the groaning of leather that attends ducal movements, Poirot went to the window and stood quite still, fingertips together. He wears concentration like a good suit. It fits him everywhere. "Well, Hastings," he said at last. "Well, what?" I returned. Duke, Duchess, photographs, snuffbox, hatpin, a lawyer named Basil, who, if there is any justice, keeps his herbs to himself. It seems plain enough. The Duchess has acquired damaging pictures and intends to brandish them until the Duke surrenders estates, titles, and perhaps an apology composed by Mr. Trenchard and set to music. Poirot shook his head. "You march too fast. Always you begin with the trumpet, never with the tuning of the violins. Regard the sequence first, a theft of a small object that proclaims absence the instant one opens the cabinet. Then a portfolio that proclaims presence the instant one opens the cover. Absence. Presence. Bang, a scandal is born." "I don't see the connection." "Natural element," he said, beaming. "That is why you are the perfect companion. You represent the public, honest, hasty, generous, and in love with a headline. The connection is not logical yet, but it is theatrical. Who has arranged the scene to open with an empty velvet bed? Who has timed the entrance of a black portfolio like a villain in Act 2? I privately thought that theater metaphors at 10 o'clock in the morning were an indulgence, but I have long ceased to argue with Poirot's metaphors. They breed in captivity. We set out for Strathavon House at 11 precisely, proceeding by cab through streets that had the pleased bustle of a city that thinks highly of itself. The Strathavon townhouse was of that dignified brick which looks as though it would rather be in the country. Mr. Crichton, the butler, received us like a portcullis that had taken the pledge. "His Grace telephoned," he intoned. "You are to be afforded every facility consistent with decency." "A phrase with many interpretations," murmured Poirot. "Lead us to the library, if you please." The library had all the right smells, leather, dust, and a faint odor of good behavior. In a glass-fronted cabinet midway along the wall, a velvet tray lay with a rectangular vacancy as eloquent as an empty cradle. On the desk lay a blotter, rather new, a bottle of black ink, and a little brass cherub that served as a paperweight. The cherub's expression suggested it had seen things and disapproved. Poirot examined the cabinet with unnecessary tenderness. He ran a finger along the velvet, peered at the glass, and smiled at the keyhole as though it were an old friend with secrets. "Locked at night?" "He asked always," said Mr. Crichton. "Key in my custody. I open for dusting under supervision and at His Grace's pleasure." Poirot nodded. "And lately, at Her Grace's pleasure also?" Mr. Crichton's face had the courtesy of a man refusing to answer without actually answering. "Her Grace has spent less time in the house," he said. "The Lady Septon is excellent for salads." "Salads?" I repeated, baffled. "It is what ladies eat," said Mr. Crichton with the air of a naturalist. At that moment, a young man in an ink-stained cuff appeared at the door, hovering like a punctuation mark. He had smooth hair, earnest eyes, and the anxious politeness of a clerk who was promised not to breathe on the bindings. "Beg pardon, sir," he said to Crichton. "Mr. Trenchard telephoned to ask whether the inventory of leases—" "Later, Vane," said Crichton. "These gentlemen are from—" He considered, then found a word. "The Continent." Mr. Lionel Vane gave us a nervous nod and withdrew, clutching a sheaf of papers as a maiden clutches violets. I whispered to Poirot that the fellow looked liable to faint at the sight of a stapler. We made a circuit of the room. Poirot measured the window latch with his eye. He does this sort of thing. It makes latches nervous. He inspected the desk blotter, and with the discreetest dab of a finger, lifted it to reveal the faint mirror of a sentence impressed on the pad beneath. "Indecipherable. Alas, to my untrained sight. Plustard," he murmured. "For now, Hastings, we make the acquaintance of the house. The murderers, they are not born only in the libraries. Sometimes they come from the pantry. Murderers? I cried. Figure of speech, said Poirot cheerfully. But it is always well to keep the vocabulary ready. We were introduced to the staff. The footman dropped a salver with the crash of a man fulfilling his destiny. The housemaid curtsied to Poirot's mustaches. The gardener encountered in the side passage, carrying a coil of hose like a captured serpent, touched his cap and informed us that roses required discipline and that he personally distrusted lilies. I took an immediate liking to him. Back in the hall, I noticed upon the little table, where visiting cards are corralled, a narrow black ribbon, grosgrain of the sort used to tie portfolios, snagged on the corner, as if it had tried to make an exit and thought better of it. I mentioned this to Poirot, who regarded it as Napoleon might regard a river crossing. "Pick it up," he said. I did so, and pricked my finger on a faintly sticky grain. "Glue?" I asked. "Or gum arabic?" said Poirot. "Photographers use many little helps. One day, Hastings, the world will learn that art is made of paste." We left the house with the library silence following us like a thought that refuses to become a sentence. On the pavement, a motor paused just long enough for me to glimpse a woman's profile beneath a dramatic hat, the brim veiled like a secret. The car slid away. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Her Grace?" "Perhaps," he said. "Or a messenger of grace. In London, the difference is often the hat." We lunched at a small restaurant where the waiter addressed Poirot as General, which pleased him very much. He refused the English notion of coffee. "It is a beverage of suspicion," he murmured, and ordered a tisane that tasted like lawn clippings and wisdom. "So," I said, stirring my tea, "tomorrow at 11 we attend the Duchess's private viewing, endure Mr. Trenchard's smarm, and look at photographs that are apparently both indecent and editorial." "Parfait," said Poirot. "Remember, Hastings, we go not to blush, but to see. It is the edges that interest me, the borders, the mounts, the bindings. The headless man is the least interesting person in his own picture. You don't believe he's the Duke?" Poirot's mustaches made a small parenthesis. "I believe in nothing yet, but I confess a curiosity about a signet ring that travels without its owner, a snuff box that calls attention to its absence, and a hat pin that has mistaken a lapel for a battleground. These are little impertinences. I like impertinences, they confess." "And the Duchess?" I ventured. "Is she well? Dangerous?" "All beautiful people are dangerous," said Poirot. "They can afford to be. But do not fear, mon ami. We will not conclude before the last act. Life is a drama, the truth a curtain. We will draw it, but not today." He smiled, and I felt at once reassured and slightly alarmed, which is how Poirot prefers his friends. Outside, London practiced its best poker face. Inside, we rehearsed ours. Tomorrow would bring the Duchess, the portfolio, Mr. Basil Trenchard with his polished pens, and, if I knew anything of the theater, the first entrance of comedy disguised as tragedy. I confess I slept poorly. It was the photographs. I think one resents a headless man on principle. If a fellow will not show his face, he should at least have the courtesy to leave his hands out of it. Chapter 2. The Duchess and the Headless. Manna, the next morning dawned with that smug brightness peculiar to London when it has done something scandalous overnight and wishes to be admired for its enterprise. The pavements were washed clean. The air smelt faintly of ink and newsprint, and the boys hawking papers did so with the relish of men selling hot buns. "Duchess at bay," cried one. "Headless lover identified," shrieked another. I asked Poirot whether he supposed any of these papers could possibly know the truth. "My dear Hastings," he said, settling his hat at the exact angle decreed by geometry, "truth is never what sells. It is always the doubt that sells." We took a cab to the chambers of Mr. Basil Trenchard, solicitor at large, and as the Duke had described him, a man who polishes his pens. The building itself stood in a quiet street off Lincoln's Inn Fields, and had the look of a place where documents multiply in dark drawers like mushrooms. We were shown into a reception room of gloomy oak, enlivened only by a bronze bust of Cicero, who appeared to be experiencing severe indigestion. Mr. Trenchard arrived with the silken glide of a man who has made peace with his own reflection. He was of middle height, smooth-haired, and wore a tie that might have been ironed by angels. His smile, when he bestowed it upon us, was so reassuring that I instantly suspected him of everything from burglary to regicide. "Monsieur Poirot and Captain Hastings," he said in a voice as polished as his cufflinks. "How gracious of you to attend. Her Grace the Duchess will be with us presently. She is most anxious that you should see for yourselves the materials in question." "Trenchard," said Poirot, "I too am anxious to see, not the subject, but the method. For myself, I'm not curious about who removes his collar, but who trims the photograph." Before Mr. Trenchard could reply, the door opened with a flourish, and in swept the Duchess of Strathavon herself. I must confess that my first impression was one of sheer admiration. She was tall, strikingly handsome, and wore a hat that defied both balance and gravity, like an aviator determined on conquest. Her gown was of that shimmering silk which suggests it has attended more parties than its owner, and her eyes were as green as a cat's who knows the cream jug is empty. "So," she said, looking Poirot up and down as one might appraise a slightly experimental recipe, "you are the Belgian detective. And this," she turned her gaze upon me, "must be the military friend. How romantic. Tell me, do you always accompany Monsieur Poirot on his adventures, Captain Hastings, like a loyal spaniel?" I flushed, but before I could defend my honor, Poirot intervened with a little bow. "Hastings is my conscience, madam. Without him, I should be too clever by half, and that is the most dangerous proportion." The Duchess laughed, a sound as glittering as her jewels. "I like you, Monsieur Poirot. You are vain, but you admit it. That makes you tolerable." "Mercy," said Poirot gravely. We were seated, and the Duchess gestured to a leather portfolio upon the table. "Here they are," she said. "The documents of my freedom. Observe, gentlemen, the headless man who has ruined my marriage." With a theatrical movement, she undid the ribbons. I could not help noticing that they were black grosgrain, precisely like the scrap Poirot had pocketed at Strathavon House. He too observed it, though his face betrayed nothing. The photographs, once spread across the table, were, well, I hardly know how to describe them. A succession of male limbs, torsos, shoulders, hands, in attitudes which I should not have believed anyone could adopt outside a gymnasium. Each print was carefully mounted, each cropped with brutal finality at the neck. In two, the hand was clearly visible, wearing a heavy signet ring. The Duchess tapped one with a lacquered finger. "That is my husband's hand. The ring is the Strathavon seal. I need no more proof than that." "The court will agree." Poirot peered through his little magnifying glass, nodding as though examining postage stamps. "Évidemment." "Yes, the ring. But the body, madame? You are confident it belongs to his Grace?" "Of course." "Even though," Poirot pointed delicately, "the shadow falls from left to right in this photograph, and in this other, from right to left? Even though the grain of the paper is not the same? Even though one torso is a shade or two darker than the other? These are not the same negatives, madam. They are not even the same photographer." The Duchess arched an eyebrow. "So what? The effect is what matters. If my husband lent his hand to one photograph, the rest is immaterial. The public will not notice shadows. They will see what I tell them to see." "That," murmured Poirot, "is indeed the tragedy of photographs. They show not the truth, but the wish of the beholder." Mr. Trenchard coughed delicately. Nevertheless, Monsieur Poirot, the ring cannot be ignored. If His Grace's signet appears in these prints, there is, at the very least, the suggestion of impropriety. Poirot replaced his glass. Suggestions are the food of lawyers. N'est-ce pas? But I, Poirot, I feed on facts. And the facts here tell me this. Someone has assembled a man like a patchwork quilt. Arms from one, shoulders from another, hands from yet another, and then, clip. The head is removed, that no one may contradict the illusion. The Duchess leaned forward, her eyes bright. You suggest these photographs are false? I suggest, said Poirot gently, they are composed. Perhaps by an artist with scissors, perhaps by a clerk with too much imagination, but they are not. Madame, the single portrait of a single man. For a moment, there was silence. Then the Duchess laughed again, though with less gaiety. Very clever, but you underestimate the public. They will not question. They will relish. My husband has lied to me, insulted me, paraded his mistresses before the world. If these pictures condemn him, I shall not weep. Poirot bowed slightly. It is not for me to say who weeps, only to say who trims. At that instant, the door banged open, and Inspector Japp strode in, ruddy and cheerful as a man who has just outwitted a taxicab. Morning. Sorry to spoil the show, but we've got trouble at Strathavon House. Dead body in the library. Butler near fainting. Looks like your solicitor's young clerk, Lionel Vane. Mon Dieu, exclaimed Poirot. Brained with a brass cherub, if you'll believe it. Messy business. And get this, the room was locked from the inside. The Duchess's lips curved. There, you see. Where there are secrets, there is always death. Trenchard went pale. Lionel, but he was copying documents only yesterday. What possible reason? Come along, said Japp briskly. I'll want you all down there. Well then, Poirot, fancy a look at a locked room puzzle before lunch? Poirot rose, eyes glittering. Inspector, I never resist a puzzle, especially one guarded by cherubs. We followed him out into the sunlit street, the Duchess sweeping before us like a ship in full sail, Mr. Trenchard stumbling after, and Poirot walking with the serene expression of a man who has just been handed a riddle tied with grosgrain ribbon. Chapter 3. Cherubs and Snuff. We arrived at Strathavon House in Japp's motor, which rattled as though determined to confess every one of its sins. The Duke's London residence was no stranger to scandal, but I flatter myself it had not previously been visited by both the police and Poirot in one morning. Reporters were already clustered outside the railings like gulls round a fishmonger. Japp swore cheerfully at them and shouldered us through the door. Inside, the butler Crichton hovered in the hall, his face a shade paler than duty allowed. The library. Gentlemen, he intoned, the manner of a priest conducting a funeral. The library, usually a room of quiet grandeur, now had all the air of a battlefield after the cavalry has passed through. Papers were scattered on the floor. A chair overturned. And in the center lay the unhappy body of Lionel Vane, clerk, sprawled at an inelegant angle beneath a towering bookcase. At his side, the weapon, an ornate brass cherub used as a paperweight, looked as shocked as a statue can. Brained clean through, muttered Japp. Doctor puts it last night, somewhere between 10 and midnight. And here's the twist. He pointed to the oak door, which stood ajar but had clearly been forced. The thing was locked on the inside. Key in the poor devil's pocket. Window fastened tight. No sign of struggle, save what you see, I shuddered. A locked room murder. Dash it, Poirot, why do we always arrive in time for puzzles but never for the answers? Poirot did not reply immediately. He was already fussing over the desk, the chair, the floorboards, running his small hands over everything with the affection of a cat greeting familiar furniture. Inspector, he said at last, Before your men trampled through, was the window latched? Firm as a drum, said Jap. Sash catch in place. No signs of tampering. Poirot leaned close, peering at the frame. Mon ami, regard Hastings. See this smear? A little line of grease, no wider than the blade of a knife. And here on the sill, a faint outline. The print of a shoe. Narrow, pointed. A woman's shoe. Jap bent down, snorted. Could be. Could also be my sergeant's boot when he climbed in to check. Poirot shook his head. No, your sergeant is a man of beef and custard. This is a foot that pays compliments to the floor. Meanwhile, I had stationed myself beside the desk, where blotter and ink remained, and noticed something curious. I say, Poirot, look at this. Someone wrote a note here and tore it away, but you can see the impression left behind. Très bien, mon ami. Jap whisked out his little powder tin and a fresh sheet of paper, performed the kind of delicate business usually reserved for conjurers, and there it was, faint but legible. Cameo box in plain sight. Photographic plates to be delivered. Payment Friday. Cameo box? Said Jap. The snuff box, I said. The one the Duke told us about. Exactement, murmured Poirot. And photographic plates. Our poor Lionel was preparing more than one set of images. He planned to sell to another buyer. A double cross, grunted Jap, and someone caught him at it. Poirot knelt beside the body, lifting one limp hand. Ink stains on the fingers. He had been copying documents. And here, under the nail, a shred of ribbon, grosgrain, black Hastings. The very twin of that scrap we saw yesterday. The Duchess's portfolio ribbons, I whispered. Poirot merely nodded, his eyes unreadable. At that moment, the Duke himself entered, towering with indignation, his face the color of boiled beetroot. Inspector, I must protest. My house, my library, turned into a charnel ground. This outrage must be resolved at once. Sit yourself down, your grace, said Jap with irritating good humor. We'll sort it. For starters, where were you last night between 10 and midnight? The Duke drew himself up. At my club, bridge with Lord Elmsworth, Colonel Grant, and Sir Roderick Pomfret. I lost heavily. They will vouch for me with malice. And the Duchess? Asked Jap. The Duke's jaw tightened. Where she always is these days. At the Lady Septon Hotel, plotting against me with Trenchard and whoever else admires melodrama. Poirot rose, smoothing his cuffs. Your Grace, forgive me if I ask, did you recently lend your signet ring to anyone? The Duke hesitated. Yes, to Trenchard. He wished to affix a seal to some deed, and his own ring was being mended. Why do you ask? Poirot's eyes twinkled, but he said only, because rings travel, even when men do not. We returned to the desk. Jap examined the cherub, muttering about fingerprints. Poirot, however, was lost in thought, staring at the cabinet where the snuff box had once rested. It is curious, he said softly. Theft, photographs, death, all connected by ribbon and ring. But tell me, Hastings, what does one do when one has a locked door and yet wishes to escape unseen? Climb the window, pressed Jap. But for that, one needs preparation. Grease for the catch, nimble shoes, courage to descend. Our murderer was not trapped. He walked away. Jap slapped his notebook shut. So someone slipped in through the sash, caught the clerk in the act, snatched whatever he had, and cracked him with the cherub for good measure. All neat and tidy, except who? Poirot looked from Jap to me, then at the Duke. His mustaches quivered. Patience, mon ami. The answer will come, but only when we have asked the right question. For the moment, let us keep our cherubs innocent until proved guilty. As we left the library, I couldn't help glancing back at poor Lionel Vane, a nervous, forgettable young man. He had been dabbling in matters far above his station. I thought of the Duchess's mocking smile, of the Duke's thunderous outrage, of Trenchard's oily composure. All of them, in their own way, had motives. "Poirot," I murmured as we descended the stairs, "do you think this business is about photographs or about marriage?" Poirot gave one of his enigmatic shrugs. "Marriage, Hastings, is merely the longest-running photograph in the world. And like all photographs, it depends upon the light." Chapter 4. The Headless Dinner Guest. It is one of life's oddities that grief improves the British. Appetite. By 5 o'clock that same day, when one might naturally expect the Strathavon circle to be observing a suitable gloom over the late Lionel Vane, the telephones had already been at work, and we found ourselves summoned, rather, by the Duchess to a private supper in the small dining room of the Lady Septon Hotel. The invitation arrived, as invitations from great ladies do, not to be accepted so much as obeyed. "Tiens," said Poirot, inspecting the gilt-edged card. "She hunts. Who does?" I asked. "The Duchess," he said mildly. "When the stag is wounded, the proper thing is to invite the hounds to supper." We presented ourselves at the hour indicated. The Lady Septon was one of those highly varnished establishments where the carpets hush your sins and the mirrors forgive them. We were shown into an intimate room with a round table laid for 6 and a sideboard, laden with wines that had been educated at Oxford. The napkins, huge, submissive things, were shaped like lilies. I instantly distrusted them. The Duchess entered at her own pace, that is to say, a little faster than a procession and a little slower than a coup d'etat. She wore ivory satin and a necklace that might have been looted from a more honest century. The hat, less aggressively aerodynamic than the one at Chambers, nevertheless conveyed air superiority. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, holding out a gloved hand. "Captain Hastings, you see, I keep my promises." "Dinner and answers." "Madam," said Poirot, bowing. "We come hungry for both." Our fellow guests joined in a flutter. Mr. Basil Trenchard, oiled and ironed as usual, with the expression of a man prepared to apologize for other people at great length. Lady Honoria Fitzherbert, a relation of someone important, and therefore of everyone. And a young person with a fringe and a dress like a scandal whom the Duchess introduced as Miss Dolly Vavasor, a friend of my hat. "You mean a milliner?" I whispered. "Exactament," murmured Poirot. "Or perhaps an alibi with feathers." We took our places. The small room glowed. The silver murmured. The waiter, a solemn bishop of sauces, drifted to and fro with the gravity of a man who has personally sworn to uphold Bayona. The Duchess directed the proceedings with an ease that comes only to those who have never been contradicted by the weather. "Suppose," she said aloud, in the tone of one offering a mint, "we must speak of the lamented Mr. Vane." Trenchard set down his glass with a quite dreadful clink. Lionel was, well, earnest. At any rate, he would have made a sound clerk, if he had not suffered from ambition. "A vice to which the poor are liable," said Lady Honoria, who had never suffered from anything she could not have someone else do for her. Miss Vavasor, tilting her head, looked at the Duchess. "Ambition can be taught to sit," she observed, "if one has the right biscuits." "You see," said the Duchess fondly, "why I keep Dolly. She bites at the ankles of conversation." "Lionel Vane," said Poirot with a gentleness that surprised me, "bit at the ankles of a dragon." The dragon turned. The first course arrived, some cunning arrangement involving lobster, which I shall not attempt to describe for fear of libel. The Duchess toyed with it and said, "Well, Inspector Japp will clatter about and write reports. Meanwhile, I will not be intimidated out of my dinner. Basil, stop looking as if you have been left out of a will, and explain to Monsieur Poirot again how the photographs were obtained." Trenchard straightened, grateful for his cue. Her Grace was anxious to demonstrate a fact, that his Grace's hand and ring appeared in certain compromising poses. She requested a photograph of the signet in situ, as it were. His Grace had previously lent me the ring for a legal formality. I arranged for a plate to be made. Simply the hand resting upon a sleeve, perfectly decent. He dabbed his lip. I never imagined, never, that he would splice, as it were, that image with other gentlemen. A sort of do-it-yourself Adonis, supplied Miss Vavasor helpfully. The Duchess laughed. Her laughter was champagne with sharp bubbles. Really, Dolly? Poirot was examining his menu card with more interest than lobster deserves. This card, Trenchard, and this... He touched the corner. Sticky sauce? I suggested, having already spilled some on my cuff. Gum Arabic, he corrected, and slipped the card into his pocket with an apology to the waiter. Forgive, monsieur. It is a souvenir. The waiter inclined his head with the charity of a martyr. But of course, monsieur. I attempted polite conversation with Lady Honoria, and very nearly caused an international incident. She asked me what I thought of the modern woman. I, having known only 3 of them intimately, my Aunt Judith, a nurse in Flanders, and the late Miss W., who had jilted me, replied injudiciously that I believed modern women were just like old ones, only with different hats. Lady Honoria looked at me as though I had confessed to democracy and turned to her. Souped up between courses. The door opened to admit a bellboy with a small brown parcel tied with string and sealed with an officious blob of wax. He hesitated, his cap in his hands. Beg pardon, Your Grace. The porter said to bring this up, left at the desk for Mr. Trenchard, care of Your Grace. Trenchard started. For me? His fingers, I noticed, were not quite steady. Set it there, said the Duchess, cool as a church. And thank the porter from me. The parcel rested on the sideboard like a cat at a baptism. Poirot's gaze visited it and moved on, but I knew him well enough to hear the mental filing card slide home. We drifted into the fish course. The conversation under the Duchess's whip pranced through safe meadows, mutual acquaintances, wicked new plays, the correct color for motor cars. Racing green, said Miss Vavasor. Like envy, but legal. From time to time, the Duchess's eyes flicked to the parcel. Trenchard's flicked more often. Poirot, who can dine and deduce at once, began to sketch lightly, as if idly, little groups upon the tablecloth with his forefinger. Consider, he said, as though speaking to the salt, the locked library. The door is fastened from within. The key is in the pocket of the dead. Yet the window, the window, shows the little greases, the narrow footprint, the catch that has been coaxed. Someone came and went like a cat through a letterbox. It is not a gentleman's habit to climb, said Lady Honoria. It is a necessity. Then your climber was a woman? Asked Lady Honoria, scandal and interest reconciling in her. It is possible, said Poirot, or a man of small and elegant feet. Miss Vavasor admired her own. One does what one can, she murmured. You are forgetting, said the Duchess, tapping her glass, that Lionel had reason to fear men as well. He was dealing in pictures, and any man knows that a picture of himself is the most valuable hostage in the world. Tiens, said Poirot softly. How you understand the commerce. She regarded him, amused. My dear monsieur, I was born in the marketplace. Society is only a market with better tablecloths. The bellboy reappeared to whisper to the waiter. The waiter whispered to the Duchess. The Duchess nodded. A footman. Where had he come from? Placed the brown parcel before Mr. Trenchard. Do open it, Basil, said the Duchess lazily. We are all friends. Perhaps later, he murmured. It can wait. It cannot, she said pleasantly, for my curiosity has a pulse. With the air of a man unwrapping a cobra, Trenchard broke the seal and drew back the paper. Inside was a small, flat tin, old-fashioned, marked with a label in a flowing hand. Cameo box, property of Strathavon. My fork clattered. The snuff-box, I cried. Good Lord! Trenchard recoiled as if the tin had hissed, then laughed a high, artificial laugh. Why no, how absurd. Only the label. Someone's little joke. Open it, said the Duchess. With trembling fingers, he prized up the lid. The tin was empty, and the bottom, pasted carefully, lay a rectangle of velvet, cut to the exact dimensions of the vacant nest in the Strathavon cabinet. Who brings jokes to a supper where the dead are expected? Murmured Poirot. A person who plays at theater, perhaps? Trenchard shut the tin with unnecessary force. Vulgarity. Some ghoul at the house, Crichton probably. This is monstrous. The main course arrived at that moment, a providential diversion. The roast was borne in with a dignity of its own. The waiters performed a ballet with knives. The Duchess permitted the world to continue. We ate. I found I was ravenous, which I ascribed to emotion rather than greed. Poirot, who measures his appetite as he measures clues, took 2 modest slices and 87 tiny observations. Tell me, Miss Vavasor, is the fashion this season for grosgrain? She smiled, wicked and pretty. For those who can tie a proper bow? Why? Because, said Poirot, a ribbon with 3 holes tells a story. It has been pinned, unpinned, pinned again. Ribbons that travel often learn the addresses of portfolios. Miss Vavasor toyed with her wine. You are very droll, Monsieur Poirot. And you are very useful, said the Duchess, not looking at her. Coffee arrived in cups that felt like thin excuses. Poirot accepted one, sipped, shuddered, and allowed the rest to cool in dignified reproof. Now, said the Duchess, folding her napkin with military precision, to business. Monsieur Poirot, you have examined my photographs and my husband's house. You have seen the corpse that lies between them. What do you think? I think, said Poirot, that your Grace possesses courage and enemies, which is unpleasant, and a sense of timing, which is admirable. I think also that Mr. Vane began something he could not finish, and that someone finished it for him. Lastly, his eyes glinted, I think that Truth has been invited to dinner, but not yet served. She laughed. You avoid conclusions. Is that out of gallantry towards me, or caution towards the law? Out of respect for the last act, said Poirot. It is a vulgarity to applaud too soon, Lady Honoria clucked. All very foreign. In England, we prefer our truths underdone. The Duchess rose. We, like obedient furniture, did likewise. Gentlemen, she said, this has been charming. You will forgive me if I now dismiss you. I am exhausted by being correct. Trenchard hovered, torn between the parcel and the door. Miss Vavasor slid an arm through the Duchess's with proprietorial grace. Poirot, on the threshold, paused. He turned to the waiter. One question, mon brave. The terrace doors, do they remain unlocked in this fine weather? The man bowed. They are opened for air, monsieur, until the last guest departs. The fire escape is just beyond, but one sees it only from outside. Poirot's smile was small and private. Merci, the air is a very good servant. We stepped out into the hotel. Corridor with its red runner and its whispering lamps. Behind us came the small metallic sound of the tin's lid being closed once more. Ahead of us, at the far end, a glass door showed a sliver of night, and the suggestion of iron steps climbing like a trellis. Windows and ribbons, I said. Cherubs and signet rings. Hastings is confused. Then, said Poirot, taking my arm, Hastings is in the correct condition. Confusion is the porch of knowledge. One stands there shivering until the host remembers to open the door. In the lobby, under the compassionate gaze of a palm tree, we encountered Inspector Japp, who had the air of a man trying to look casual in a place that charges extra for it. Evening, you two. Just thought I'd make sure the Duchess's supper didn't turn into a second crime scene. Any fun? On the contrary, said Poirot. Only theater. Same thing, said Jap. As we walked out into Mayfair's discreet darkness, a soft rain began, the kind London uses for punctuation. Poirot tilted his hat, serene as a saint on a good day. I blurted what had been gnawing me since the lobster. Poirot, was that the snuff box, or a threat in a tin? It was, he said, a telegram without stamps. Someone says, I can reach into your cabinet and into your supper. Pay attention? Who? Chut. We do not ask who. We ask why they chose gum Arabic over string, the terrace over the front hall, the ribbon with 3 holes over the ribbon with 2. When we have those answers, the head will grow back upon our headless man, and the cherub will point its little finger. Cherubs don't have fingers, I protested. Then, said Poirot placidly, it will grow one, like a fact. We crossed the wet pavement to our cab. Somewhere behind us, a lady laughed very lightly, as if she had just hidden a card up her sleeve and found it entertaining. London, which is the most accomplished conspirator in Europe, drew its curtains and listened. Chapter de Fiançailles. 5. Whispers in Grosgrain. The morning after our adventurous supper at the Lady Septon Hotel, Poirot announced that he required exercise. This, in Poirot's vocabulary, means not tennis or golf, but strolling very slowly down Bond Street while inspecting hats in shop windows. Mon ami, he explained as we walked, if you would know society, you must know its hats. They are the passports of the soul. I thought passports were papers, I said. They are also papers, he replied serenely. But a woman may lie with her words, never with her hat. I was on the point of remarking that the Duchesses' hats were therefore the most dangerous documents in London when a cab pulled up sharply beside us. Out stepped Inspector Jap, looking harassed and carrying what appeared to be a shoe wrapped in brown paper. Poirot, he called. Good timing. I was just on my way to you. Look here. He unwrapped the parcel to reveal a narrow black slipper with a delicate heel, the sort of thing no respectable woman could wear without at least 6 footmen to hold her steady. Found this under the ivy outside the library window at Strathavon House, said Jap. Matches the faint print on the sill. What do you say to that? Poirot bent over it as reverently as if it were the crown of Belgium. Très élégant. Très élégant. Grosgrain trim, pinch toe, Paris make. Hastings observed the smear of grease on the strap. I looked obediently, and saw only a shoe that had seen better nights. Whose is it? That's what I'm asking, said Jap grimly. The servants swear it's not theirs. Too fine. So either her grace or one of her friends took a stroll up the ivy last night. The Duchess? I exclaimed. She wouldn't climb a wall. Poirot's mustaches quivered. No, Hastings. Not the Duchess. But perhaps one of her entourage. A little star who orbits a greater planet and sometimes falls. At that moment, who should sweep round the corner but the Duchess herself, Dolly Vavasor fluttering at her elbow like an energetic sparrow. The Duchess's eyes fell instantly upon the shoe in Jap's hand. Really? Inspector? She drawled. I hope you don't go around London accosting every lady with footwear. Some of us buy them by the dozen. This one, said Jap, wasn't bought. It was dropped. Her Grace's eyes flickered, just for an instant, toward Dolly. The little milliner colored but said nothing, merely burying her nose in a plume of marabou as though seeking asylum. Poirot, with exquisite tact, replaced the shoe in its wrapping. La vérité. She hides herself for now, but she will not remain hidden forever. The Duchess gave him a smile, both dazzling and dangerous. Monsieur Poirot, you may play with ribbons and slippers as long as you please. I, however, am going to lunch." And with that, she swept into her motor. Dolly gave us a guilty little nod and scampered after her. That evening at Whitehaven Mansions, Poirot settled in his chair with the air of a man who has ordered the world into files. Meanwhile, paced. "Poirot," I burst out, "are you suggesting the Duchess's friend? Miss Vavasor climbed the window? That seems absurd. She's scarcely 5 feet." Poirot raised a finger. "Do not underestimate small people, Hastings. They can reach very high when they climb upon the shoulders of ambition." But then, was she working for the Duchess or against her? "Patience. All will be revealed," I groaned. "You always say that." "And it is always true," he said, beaming. "Meanwhile, let us note what we have. A missing snuff box that was meant to be noticed missing. A set of photographs meant to be noticed present. A clerk who was meant not to be noticed at all, until he became too noticeable. And now, a shoe, a ribbon, and a cherub." He sipped his tisane with maddening calm. "Poirot," I said desperately, "do you at least know who the murderer is?" He lowered his cup. "I know who is innocent. And who is that?" "Me," said Poirot gravely. "I gave it up as hopeless. That night, sleep deserted me. My dreams were full of cherubs leaping from bookshelves, ribbons strangling innocent people, and headless men parading through Bond Street demanding shoes. When I stumbled into breakfast the next morning, Poirot was already immaculate, arranging cards on the table as if preparing for a séance. "Hastings, mon ami," he said. "Today the play ends. This evening we shall invite all our actors to the library once more, and then at last the curtain will fall." "You mean you'll gather them? Everyone in the library?" "Mais oui. The Duke, the Duchess, Mr. Trenchard, Miss Vavasor, Inspector Japp, they shall all be there, and Poirot will speak." "About the murderer?" I asked. "About everything," he said softly. "The headless man shall find his head. The cherub shall confess its blow, and the snuff-box shall explain its little game. Voila." He patted my arm kindly. "Courage, mon ami. The last act is always the most amusing." I was not reassured. Chapter 6. The Little Gray Curtain. By 7 o'clock that evening, the Strathavon Library was once more the stage of tragedy, though I dare say it resembled a farce more than anything. Shakespearean Poirot had demanded that every principal character attend, and by some miracle of stubbornness and curiosity, they did. The Duke loomed beside the fireplace like a disapproving monument. The Duchess lounged on the sofa in violet silk, smoking as though it were a duel. Basil Trenchard mopped his forehead at intervals of 30 seconds. Miss Dolly. Vavasor perched on a chair like an exotic bird awaiting seed. Inspector Japp leaned against the mantel, notebook ready, but eyes twinkling. I myself occupied my usual position, slightly bewildered, wholly unnecessary, and determined not to miss the moment when Poirot pulled the rabbit from the hat. Poirot stood in the center, small, immaculate, his mustaches gleaming like the wings of an ambitious beetle. He bowed, as though opening a concert. "Mesdames, Monsieur," he began, "thank you for your attendance. You are impatient, I know. You ask who killed Lionel Vane? Who stole the snuff-box? Who composed the photographs? In one word, who?" "Exactly," said the Duke, arms folded like crossed cannons. "All in good time, Your Grace," Poirot said smoothly. "Before we speak of who, we must speak of how. Because without the method, the murderer remains headless, like our unfortunate gentleman in the photographs." The Duchess exhaled smoke through her nose. "Really, must we endure a lecture? Surely the inspector can simply arrest someone." "Madam," Poirot said gravely, "you cannot arrest without reason." "That is called politics," Japp grinned. "Go on then, old son." "I've cleared my evening," Poirot lifted a finger. "First, the photographs. They are not the record of one man's indiscretion. They are a patchwork. A torso from here, an arm from there, a hand wearing the Duke's ring, supplied by Mr. Trenchard. Trenchard made a strangled noise. I never imagined, Monsieur, you lent the ring. You permitted the photograph of the hand. You were perhaps weak, perhaps foolish, perhaps both. But you did not create the monster. That was Lionel Vane. He was clever with scissors, clever with gum, clever with shadows. He assembled a phantom and sold him as the Duke. The Duke harumphed. Ridiculous! On the contrary, said Poirot, highly practical. No head, no contradiction. Anyone can be the headless man, especially a duke one wishes to disgrace. Miss Vavasour clapped softly. Bravo! The headless man is everyone's lover. Silence, Dolly, the Duchess said, without looking at her. Poirot spread his hands. Now, the snuff-box. Why steal it? Not for value. It is precious only to the Strathavons. But to remove it was to announce, I can reach you. To plant fear in the Duke, and to create the proper stage for the photographs. Absence followed by presence. Empty cabinet, full portfolio. A drama in 2 acts, Jap nodded. All right, that's neat enough. But what about the murder? Patience, Inspector? Poirot moved to the desk and tapped the brass cherub. Lionel Vane was preparing to sell a second set of plates. He had written as much. Payment Friday. He intended to profit twice, perhaps 3 times. But someone feared his tongue. Someone entered by the sash window. The grease on the catch, the footprint on the sill, the slipper found outside all tell us so. They argued. They snatched. The cherub fell. Vane died, he paused. The silence thickened. Then who was it? I asked breathlessly. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Who indeed would climb a sash in the night, nimble as a cat, desperate enough to silence the clerk? Not the Duke, too large. Not the Duchess, too proud. Not Mr. Trenchard. He fears ladders more than lawsuits. No. The climber was smaller, lighter, more agile, someone whose shoe we found beneath the ivy, someone who obeys commands. All eyes turned toward Miss Dolly Vavasour. She gave a little gasp, then laughed brightly. Oh, how perfect! You're accusing me of murder because I lost a shoe? Really, monsieur? I drop them everywhere. Ask anyone. Poirot shook his head. Not murder, not yet. You went to the library, yes. You climbed to retrieve the snuff-box or the photographs at your mistress's bidding. But you are not the one who struck the blow. No, Dolly. You screamed and fled when Lionel resisted. It was another who entered by the door, seized the cherub, and ended the play. Trenchard's handkerchief froze halfway to his face. You cannot mean... Poirot turned slowly to him. Monsieur, you followed Mademoiselle. You knew Lionel had gone too far. He might betray you as easily as the Duke or Duchess. You confronted him. You struggled. You struck, not with malice, but with panic. The cherub was heavy, convenient. That is why it bears no plan, only haste. Trenchard half rose, stammering. No, he was going to ruin everything. I only meant to frighten him. The Duchess flicked ash delicately. Basil, really? If you were going to kill my clerk, the least you might have done was make it look stylish. Jap stepped forward, hand on Trenchard's shoulder. That's enough, sir. We'll hear the rest down at the yard. Poirot lifted a hand. One more thing, the photographs. Where are the negatives? Trenchard sagged, destroyed. Burned last night. I swear it, one. Poirot bowed slightly. Then only the ghosts remain. Adjourned to the hall while Jap's men took charge of the wretched solicitor. The Duke, still upright as a fortress, muttered something about dishonorable parasites. The Duchess, radiant in her victory, tossed her cigarette into the umbrella stand. You see, Monsieur Poirot, I win after all. Poirot bowed. Madame, in such battles there are no winners, only survivors. may I advise? Burn also the prints. They are poison, and poison does not stop killing. She smiled thinly. Perhaps. But poison, properly administered, can be useful. And with that, she swept out, Dolly trotting after her like a feathered shadow. The Duke glowered. My name has been dragged through filth. Can you clear it, Poirot? Poirot considered. Your Grace, a reputation is like velvet. It shows every crease. But at least now you know which hands wrinkled it. Later, at Whitehaven Mansions, I found Poirot in his chair, mustaches at perfect attention. So it was Trenchard all along, I said. But you didn't know until tonight, did you? He twinkled. I knew he was afraid. Fear leaves fingerprints larger than hands. But to prove it, that required Dolly's shoe, Lionel's note, the ribbon, the snuff box in its silly little tin. They were pieces of the puzzle, and at last the curtain could be drawn. I shook my head. I don't know how you do it, Poirot. He leaned back, serene. In truth, mon ami, this was not a case of passion, but of vanity. The Duke wished to appear noble. The Duchess wished to appear wronged. Trenchard wished to appear indispensable. And poor Lionel wished to appear clever. Only the cherub was honest. It merely fell where it was pushed. I laughed in spite of myself. And what about Dolly? Poirot smiled. She will fasten herself to another queen bee. It is the habit of her kind. He raised his tisane in salute to the comedy, Hastings. For in every tragedy, there hides a farce. One has only to listen for the applause, and so concludes the Duchess, the snuff-box, and the cherub. A tale where ribbons and rings conspired to disgrace, where a cherub turned executioner, and where Poirot, with patience and wit, restored the true pattern behind the scandal. This story was written by us in homage to Agatha Christie. Though it takes its spark from the atmosphere of high society intrigue, the plot and mystery you've heard are entirely our own invention. If you've listened until the end, then you are the reason these stories continue. Thank you for being part of this growing community. Your encouragement, your reflections, and your comments are what make sharing these mysteries such a joy. I spend time with them, and I try to reply whenever I can. If you'd like to go further, you can join our membership for ad-free episodes and exclusive extras, or leave a small tip. But know that simply by being here, listening, and sharing, you are already giving more than enough. Until our next mystery. Good night.